imagine the darbar of India's greatest Mughal emperor Akbar. Or imagine Empress Josephine descending the grand staircase of Versailles on the arm of Napoleon. Or Queen Victoria walking in her splendid gardens. It is likely that each of them was draped in a jewel woven on the looms of Kashmir, the incomparable Kani shawl. The Eastern world has always viewed textiles as worthy of sanctity and worship. Textiles were also movable assets to be prized and used for transaction when in need of funds. Most of these royal textiles were developed in Central Asia under royal patronage, and the Kani shawl was no different. While twill tapestry weaving existed in parts of India earlier, it was introduced to Kashmir by Zainul Abidin in the 15th century. Importing weavers from Persia and Central Asia, he gave them the patronage required to develop textiles of a magnificence that matched those produced in their home countries. This, it is believed, was the birth of the Kashmiri Kani shawl, and the preponderant Muslim tradition of using luxury textiles as marks of honor fueled their demand. Trade in Kani shawls accompanied the trading of spices with Europe, and these shawls became an object of desire for every European lady of worth. French designers even started sending their own design to the weavers. Soon, however, machine-made European copies and political upheavals nearly destroyed the art. Thankfully, art and textile lovers in post-independence India and government patronage ensured a revival over the last 60 years. The process begins with the purchase of the raw wool, pashmina, from the Himalayan hills like Lhasa and Ladakh. The wool comes from the goat-like pashmina sheep. The vendors come to Srinagar, where they sell the wool to wholesalers, who in turn sell the wool to shopkeepers. The wool is sold to women belonging to families dealing with pashmina. They clean the wool, removing the hair from the fleece. Once the fleece has been cleaned, it is spun into yarn on a charkha spinning wheel. This comes out as single-ply yarn. 2 single-ply yarns are then hand-rolled into double-ply and put back onto the charkha for spinning. These are wound onto specially shaped bobbins and sold back to the shopkeepers. The shopkeepers then sell the spun yarn back to the wholesalers, who also handle the production of the shawls. Yarn comes in 2 shades. One is white, the other natural. Depending on the color scheme needed for the shawl, the yarn is hand-dyed. The dyeing, traditionally using vegetable dyes, now uses acid dyes, and 3 hanks at a time are dyed. The weaver first washes the dyed yarn with soap nut, arita, and makes hanks. It is then starched with rice water to strengthen it and make it stronger for the weaving. The yarn is wound onto a bobbin while still wet. As it dries, it is very stiff and not ready for warping, so it is rewound onto another bobbin to loosen and separate out the yarns strand by strand. The yarn is then used to make a warp of 6, 10 or 12 yards, with the warping done out in the open with pegs stuck into the ground for accurate measuring.
The
warp is mounted onto a beam hung from the ceiling, where the drafting and denting are done separately and not directly onto the loom. This work is done primarily by women in their homes. The drafting heels of Kani shawls are made of cotton and not of steel or other metals, as in most other looms. The reed too is made of bamboo and not metal. The bamboo reed is periodically cleaned with coconut shavings. The bamboo with the warp is then mounted onto a loom and is ready for weaving. Two wooden blocks which look like dumbbells are used to wind the yarn onto the bobbin. The dyed weft yarn is now rolled to tiny bobbins called kanis, tillis or taj. The design for a particular shawl is traced onto a tracing paper and then converted onto a graph. The master weaver then transfers this graph into a coded document called a talim. Traditionally, he then calls out the codes which the weavers follow and weave accordingly. Today, the talim has been made less complex by transferring the graph into a series of readable letters and numbers which any of the weavers can read. A further simplification is placing the design directly under the warp and reading it visually. Looms are made of wood and are two-sided, with two sets of weavers sitting facing each other, working on two separate shawls simultaneously. Each shawl is also woven by two weavers, and the total number of tillis they use can go up to over 250. For the largest men's shawls, which are 1.5 yards wide, 3 weavers sit side by side. The women's standard shawls measure 1 meter by 2 meters and the standard men's 1.5 meters by 3 meters. The larger men's shawls are 6 yards long. Standard shawls can take between 4 and 6 months to weave. Once the shawl is woven, it is sent for a wash to remove the starch. It then goes to the parashgar, who clips off the extra threads with an implement called the votsu. A rafugar, expert darner, examines it for defects and corrects when possible. If the Kani shawl is to be embroidered, it then goes to the Sozni embroiderers for embellishing. Highly embroidered shawls are called jamawars. These embroidered shawls are washed a third time. Washermen specializing in steam pressing have a final go at the shawls, which are then ready for the market. Today, the weaving of Kani shawls in Kashmir is usually organized in workshops where one owner weaver gives work to many others, whether working in the workshop or from their own homes. More than 40 families are involved in the long and arduous process that leads to this final work of art. The increase in the world market for luxury goods can mean a new life to these exquisite shawls with their use for garments and coats. The weavers are in place and await draping the shoulders and bodies of today's emperors and empresses.